In all my years on the bench, I've learned that disrespect rarely enters a courtroom quietly. It arrives with an energy, a heat, a subtle pressure in the air that makes every officer unconsciously straighten and every spectator lean forward as if sensing something will soon unfold that none of us will forget. That is exactly what I felt on the morning the CEO's daughter, Camilla Rourke, age 23, heir to one of the largest private logistics empires in the Northeast, stepped into my courtroom as though the entire building were merely a poorly lit stage for her personal performance. She didn't wait for the clerk to call her name. She strolled in during the middle of another hearing, her heels clicking in a sharp, deliberate rhythm meant to command attention. She wore a tailored cream-colored coat, sunglasses far too large for the quiet gray light of the morning, and an expression that hovered somewhere between boredom and irritation. Behind her trailed an attorney who looked less like legal counsel and more like a man who had spent the whole drive rehearsing apologies in advance. I looked up from the case before me, but she didn't acknowledge me, not with a nod, not with a polite gesture, not even with the reflexive respect I've received from thousands of defendants over the decades. Instead, Camilla marched straight to the defense table, tossed her designer bag onto it as if it were a hotel counter, and sat down with the unmistakable swagger of someone who had never been told the word no. When the clerk called her case, reckless driving, obstruction, and disorderly conduct, she remained seated. Most defendants rise immediately, even those who fear what might come next. But Camilla simply adjusted her sunglasses, crossed her legs, and picked up her phone, thumbing the screen with the detached elegance of a woman scrolling through boutique options, not waiting for judgment on criminal charges. Her attorney leaned toward her and whispered urgently, "Camilla, please stand. Now." She waved him off without looking. I cleared my throat. "Ms. Rourke," I said, keeping my tone steady, "in this courtroom, when your case is called, you stand." She didn't. Instead, she let out a small laugh. Not loud, not dramatic, just a soft, knowing chuckle that carried the unmistakable message, "Who exactly do you think you're talking to?" Her attorney stood, sweat already gathering at his temples. "Your Honor, if I may, my client." I lifted a hand gently. "Counselor, your client can speak for herself." Camilla finally removed her sunglasses, revealing sharp blue eyes that swept across the courtroom with cold, amused evaluation. "Judge," she said, her voice smooth but edged with entitlement, "can we make this quick? I have a brunch reservation." A murmur rippled through the gallery, ordinary citizens, workers, parents, veterans, each person reacting with a kind of stunned disbelief that anyone would treat a courtroom with such casual contempt. Even the officers lining the back wall shifted subtly, their eyes narrowing. I met Camilla's gaze evenly. "Ms. Rourke," I said, "your schedule is not relevant here. What is relevant is your conduct in this courtroom." She smirked, an arrogant, practiced expression that suggested she had long ago learned how to turn arrogance into armor. "My father will handle any fines," she replied. "So can we skip the theatrics?" Her attorney closed his eyes briefly, as though preparing for impact. And it was in that moment, in the sharp tension between her careless tone and the stunned silence of every person in the room, that I recognized something I had not seen in years, a defendant so deeply insulated by privilege that she did not yet understand she was standing at the edge of a cliff. And that was when I realized this was going to be one of the most challenging, and dangerous, cases I had ever handled. Before we continued with the hearing, I knew I had to put the charges into context, not only for the record, but because every person in that courtroom deserved to understand why this case mattered. Cases involving the children of powerful people rarely begin with the moment they get caught. They begin long before, in habits, in environments, in expectations shaped by years of soft landings and invisible cushions. And Camilla Rourke was no different. The police report, which I had reviewed earlier that morning, described the incident with clinical precision, but even through the formal language, the pattern was clear: entitlement mixed with recklessness, and recklessness mixed with danger. 3 nights earlier, just after midnight, Camilla had been driving her father's custom luxury SUV through the historic waterfront district, an area where narrow streets, heavy foot traffic, and late-night workers make speed limits not a suggestion but a necessity. Witnesses reported that the SUV was moving, like a bullet, weaving between parked cars and blowing through a pedestrian crosswalk that had been flashing red. A delivery cyclist named Marco Luis, a 27-year-old immigrant from Cape Verde who worked 2 jobs to support his family, was nearly struck. He jumped off his bike just in time, stumbling onto the sidewalk and bruising his shoulder on a metal post. His bike wasn't as lucky. Cam footage from a nearby storefront showed the SUV clipping the rear tire, sending the bike spinning into the curb. The SUV didn't stop. Marco shouted, but the vehicle sped away, turning sharply onto Fulton Street. A retired schoolteacher who had been walking home from a late dinner witnessed everything and called the police. Officer Rachel Sutter responded first. Her bodycam footage, later to be shown in court, captured her approaching the SUV, now parked haphazardly outside an upscale lounge. Camilla stood beside the vehicle, laughing loudly with 2 friends, all of them dressed for a night of indulgence rather than responsibility. "Miss, I need to speak with you," Officer Sutter said calmly. Camilla barely glanced at her, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "Can we not do this right now? It's been a long night." The officer explained the near collision and asked for her license. That was when Camilla's tone shifted from dismissive to combative. "This is ridiculous," she scoffed. "No one got hurt. And even if they did, it's not like I'm some random person off the street. You know who my father is, right?" Officer Sutter remained professional, but the report noted Camilla's increasing agitation, refusing to hand over her documents, stepping too close to the officer, accusing her of targeting her because of her last name. Eventually the officer called for backup when Camilla attempted to walk into the lounge despite instructions not to leave the scene. The obstruction charge stemmed from that moment. But what concerned me most was Marco's statement, which I read twice before the hearing. He described lying awake after the incident, imagining what might have happened if he had been a second slower, if he hadn't jumped, if he had been struck and left injured, or worse, while the driver continued on to cocktails and laughter. "I don't want trouble," he wrote, "but I want to feel like people like me matter." It was a simple sentence, but in it lived the quiet plea of thousands of unseen workers whose safety often depends on the choices of people who never think twice. And as I looked across the courtroom at Camilla, still leaning back, still scrolling her phone, still untouched by the gravity of her actions, I realized this wasn't just about a traffic incident. It was about whether her father's wealth would once again smother accountability, or whether this courtroom could become the first place in her life where consequences finally met entitlement. The stakes were no longer just legal. They were moral, communal, and deeply human. When we resumed the hearing, the temperature in the room felt different, not physically, but in tension, in the quiet hum of anticipation that settles in when an entire gallery senses a collision is coming. I looked out at the faces filling the benches, working parents who'd taken time off to resolve parking citations, a retired veteran waiting patiently for his case, a young mother holding her son's hand. They all watched Camilla with an uncomfortable mixture of disbelief and curiosity, as if they were witnessing a creature from another world, one where consequences merely existed for decoration. Her attorney, a man named Harold Grant, rose slowly from his seat, smoothing his tie in a way that betrayed his nerves. "Your Honor," he began, adopting a tone meant to soothe, "my client is eager to resolve this matter and is prepared to." "She's not eager," Camilla interrupted without looking up from her phone. "I'm just trying to get this over with." "Can you tell him that, Judge? He keeps acting like this is some big deal." Harold closed his eyes for the briefest second, the way a person does when they're biting back a plea to the universe. I addressed her directly. "Ms. Rourke, please put your phone away." She smirked, tapped one last message, and slipped the phone into her bag. "Happy?" Her tone was a challenge, not compliance. Harold cleared his throat again. "As I was saying, Your Honor, my client acknowledges there was an incident. She is willing to pay restitution for the damaged bicycle and resolve any fines." Marco, the victim, sat in the second row. At those words, "resolve fines," he lowered his gaze, and I saw his hands tighten on his knees. The idea that everything he'd experienced could be reduced to a financial transaction struck him, and others in the gallery, as deeply unsettling. I leaned forward. "Ms. Rourke, do you understand the charges against you?" She shrugged. "Reckless driving, whatever. My father's insurance can cover it." "And the obstruction charge?" I asked. "That was blown out of proportion," she said, flipping her hair over her shoulder. The officer was being dramatic. "If anything, I'm the one who should have been upset. I was dragged into this for nothing." Her voice carried a tone so dismissive that the room reacted, not loudly, but enough that I sensed the discomfort ripple outward. People who spent their lives following rules suddenly found themselves face to face with someone who treated the rules as ornamental. I kept my tone even. "Ms. Rourke," a man was almost struck. Another foot of distance and we'd be discussing a very different case. A case involving injury or death. She rolled her eyes. "Well, that didn't happen. So can we not pretend like I'm some criminal?" Harold whispered urgently, "Camilla, please." "No," she snapped. "I'm not going to sit here and be lectured. Everyone makes mistakes. And honestly, if that guy was paying attention, he wouldn't have jumped in the way." The gallery gasped. It wasn't a dramatic, theatrical gasp, it was the sound of people confronted with pure entitlement, distilled into a single careless accusation. Marco stood slowly, his voice soft but trembling with controlled emotion. "I wasn't in the way," he said. "You drove through the crosswalk." Camilla looked at him for the first time, the faintest glance, and replied, "Okay, well, you're fine now. So can we move on?" Her words struck the room like a cold wind. I held up a hand to keep the gallery calm. "Ms. Rourke, your attitude suggests you may not fully understand the seriousness of these charges. For that reason, this court will review the bodycam footage and the witness statements in open court." Harold swallowed hard. Camilla let out a short laugh, one final attempt to belittle the process. "Fine. If that's what it takes. This whole thing is ridiculous anyway." But in that moment, as the officer prepared the evidence, I saw something flicker through her expression, a brief tightening around the eyes, the faint edge of anxiety. Because deep down, beneath the layers of privilege and arrogance, even she sensed the truth. She was no longer in control. When I ordered the bodycam footage to be played, the courtroom lights dimmed slightly, and the soft hum of the monitor filled the silence. It's remarkable how quiet a room becomes when truth is about to walk in, how even the slightest whisper from the gallery evaporates as people lean forward, instinctively preparing themselves for clarity, for impact, for the shift that evidence often brings. Officer Rachel Sutter stood near the front as the footage began. She held her posture with the poise of someone who has faced far louder courtrooms and far more dangerous nights, but I noticed a hint of tension in her eyes, because in her world, credibility matters. And this footage was her truth. The video opened on the SUV parked crookedly outside the lounge, headlights still on, music blaring faintly from inside. Officer Sutter approached slowly, her calm voice narrating the situation into her mic. "Vehicle matching witness description located outside Harbor Lounge. Suspected operator nearby." The camera angle shifted, revealing Camilla standing near the curb with two friends, laughing loudly, their drinks still in hand. The timestamp placed the moment just minutes after Marco's near collision. "Miss, I need to speak with you about an incident involving your vehicle," Officer Sutter said. Camilla barely turned her head. "Can it wait?" she grumbled. "We're having a night." The footage captured every detail, the slur in her voice, the dismissive wave of her hand, the arrogant posture of someone accustomed to being shielded from consequence. Officer Sutter continued, patient and precise. "Your vehicle was involved in a near collision with a cyclist." "That's ridiculous," Camilla's friend interrupted. "We didn't hit anything." "You hit my bike," Marco whispered from the gallery, tears beginning to pool in the corners of his eyes as he watched himself shouted into silence on screen. Officer Sutter asked for Camilla's license. "Do you know who my father is?" Camilla responded, shifting her weight with a combination of irritation and intoxication. This is a waste of time. I'm not giving you anything. The room reacted. Not loudly, but with that subtle, collective tightening that comes when arrogance meets accountability. The footage continued. Camilla attempted to walk away toward the lounge. Officer Sutter stepped in front of her, firm but composed. "Miss, you are not free to leave." "Don't touch me," Camilla snapped, though the officer's body language remained neutral, her hands nowhere near Camilla. A second police unit arrived. Camilla placed her hands on her hips and unleashed a barrage of accusations: power trip, harassment, you'll be sorry, each word dripping with entitlement. Only when her friends urged her to stop did she finally return to the vehicle and comply, though with every movement steeped in contempt. When the screen went dark, the room stayed silent long enough for the weight of the footage to settle. For the truth to breathe. I turned to Marco. "If you wish to make a statement, you may do so now." He rose slowly, clutching a worn baseball cap in both hands. His voice trembled, but he held himself with dignity. "I don't want revenge," he said. "I don't want money. I just want to feel like I matter. I came to this country to work hard, not to worry that someone like her can almost hit me and then laugh like it doesn't mean anything." Several people in the gallery lowered their eyes, deeply moved. Camilla crossed her arms. "He's exaggerating. Like, nobody died. Why is everyone acting like this is some tragedy?" Her words cracked the spell of silence, releasing a wave of disbelief across the room. Even Harold placed a hand on his forehead, as though bracing himself for the fallout. And in that moment, as her indifference collided with the raw truth of the footage and Marco's pain, something fundamental shifted. The gallery now understood her fully. Every citizen in that room saw her not as a misguided young woman, but as someone who believed harm only mattered when it happened to her. And I knew. The next act would determine whether justice could reach someone who had spent her life outrunning it. There is a moment in some cases when the truth stops being a matter of evidence and becomes something far heavier, undeniable character exposed under pressure. As I looked at Camilla after the footage ended and after Marco shared his quiet, trembling testimony, I saw the faintest flicker of something in her expression. Not remorse. Not humility. Something far more volatile, threatened pride. Her attorney, Harold, stood again, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges that her behavior that night may have been less than ideal. But she's prepared to." "I'm not acknowledging anything," Camilla snapped, loud enough for the gallery to jump. She rose from her chair, placing both palms on the defense table, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. All of it. You're all acting like I'm some criminal because I didn't bow down to a cop on a power trip." Officer Sutter remained still, shoulders straight, her professionalism a quiet contrast to Camilla's unraveling. I kept my tone level. "Ms. Rourke, please sit down." "No," she said, voice cracking with entitlement and frustration. "I'm not sitting. I'm not letting everyone in this room judge me like I'm some lowlife who doesn't matter." Marco inhaled sharply. The gallery stiffened. I waited a moment, letting silence sharpen the edges of her words. "Ms. Rourke," I said, "no one here is judging your worth as a person. We are judging your actions." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Oh, please. You think I don't know how this works? You get to play hero in front of these people, and I'm the villain because it makes you look good." Harold Whisper shouted, "Camilla, stop. Sit down." She ignored him completely and turned toward the gallery. "You all think you're so perfect, don't you? Like you've never made a mistake." She pointed at Marco, wasn't even hurt. "He's milking this for attention." Gasps rippled through the room like a wave hitting shoals. Marco's voice wavered. "I could have died." "Oh, give me a break," Camilla muttered. "If my dad wanted to, he could buy this entire courthouse and shut it down. All of you, acting like any of this matters. I felt the shift. That dangerous moment when arrogance stops being a shield and becomes a weapon, when privilege, unrestrained, reveals exactly how it sees the world. "Ms. Rourke," I said quietly, "you are dangerously close to contempt of court." She turned to me then, eyes sharp, jaw set, and delivered the sentence that would define the rest of this hearing. "People like me don't answer to people like you." The gallery froze. Even the officers shifted, instinctively bracing for what came next. Her words echoed through the room, cold, raw, unfiltered entitlement laid bare. Not a slip of the tongue. A belief. A worldview. I studied her for a long moment, allowing the weight of what she'd said to settle. Behind her fury, I could see the trembling edges of someone unaccustomed to boundaries, someone who had mistaken indulgence for immunity. "Ms. Rourke," I said, each word measured, "you have just crossed a line from which there is no easy return." For the first time, she hesitated. Her breath caught. Her facade wavered. She looked at her attorney, at the gallery, at me, and saw no sympathy, no fear, no deference. Only the quiet, immovable truth of accountability. She sank slowly into her chair, realization creeping into her posture like a slow descent into cold water. And as she lowered her gaze, I knew we had reached the emotional peak of this case, not the sentencing, not the evidence, but this moment right here. The moment when entitlement collided headfirst with a boundary she could not bend. There is a specific kind of silence that falls in a courtroom when entitlement finally meets immovable truth. It is not the silence of fear, nor the silence of anticipation, but the silence of clarity, when everyone present understands that what happens next is no longer a negotiation, but a reckoning. That was the silence that settled over my courtroom as Camilla sank back into her chair, her earlier confidence evaporating like mist under bright light. I folded my hands, took a breath, and let the moment ground itself. "Ms. Rourke," I began, my voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge, "what we have witnessed here today has gone far beyond traffic violations or an unfortunate night. It has revealed an alarming belief that your status, your wealth, or your father's influence entitles you to disregard the law and to belittle the people who share your community." Her eyes flicked upward, just briefly. A hint of defensiveness flickered there, but I continued before she could speak. "Let me be perfectly clear, the law does not bend for the wealthy. It does not bow to arrogance. And it does not grant immunity to those who believe accountability is optional." Harold swallowed, bracing himself. Camilla's knuckles whitened. I turned to the gallery. Ordinary citizens watched with a mixture of relief and disbelief, perhaps wondering if today might be the rare day when justice actually felt equal, when people like them were seen, not overlooked. Then I faced Camilla again. "Your words today, 'people like me don't answer to people like you,' were not simply disrespectful. They were revealing. They showed your belief that this courtroom, this legal system, and the people who keep it functioning are beneath you. That is a dangerous belief for anyone to hold, especially someone who operates a vehicle on public streets." Her eyes darted to her lap. "Given the gravity of your actions and the contempt you have shown toward this court, I am issuing the following sentence." The room leaned forward. "First, your driver's license is suspended for 90 days. This is not to punish you, but to protect the public from someone who has demonstrated reckless disregard for human life." A muffled gasp came from the gallery. "Second, you will pay full restitution to Mr. Luis for the damage to his bicycle, the medical expenses he incurred, and the lost wages from the days he was unable to work. This payment will come from you personally, not your father, not a trust fund, and not from an insurance company. You caused the harm. You will repair it." Camilla's mouth fell open slightly, but she said nothing. "Third, you will perform 100 hours of community service with the Providence Traffic Safety Initiative. You will work alongside officers, bicyclists, delivery workers, and community volunteers. You will experience firsthand the risks they face when drivers speed, weave, and treat the streets as their personal playground." A flush crept up her neck. "And finally," I said, lowering my voice, because of your combative behavior and your attempt to leave the scene the night of the incident, this court is imposing a 2-day contempt sanction, suspended on the condition of your full compliance with these orders. If you fail to complete any portion of this sentence, you will serve those 2 days in custody." A stunned quiet washed across the room. Harold placed a gentle hand on her arm, grounding her as she stared straight ahead, her posture deflating inch by inch. "Ms. Rourke," I concluded, "you are young. You have every opportunity to grow, to learn, and to understand the world beyond the bubble privilege has built around you. But understand this, in this courtroom, nobody is above the law, and respect is not optional, it is fundamental. Today, you begin learning that." The gavel struck once, sharp and definitive. And for the first time since she walked into the room, Camilla Rourke did not laugh, did not smirk, did not roll her eyes. She simply sat there, quiet, humbled, and finally confronted by a reality she could not bend. There is a truth I have learned over decades on the bench: a sentence may end with a gavel strike, but the meaning of justice continues to unfold long after the courtroom empties. In the days following Camilla Rourke's hearing, I found myself reflecting not only on her conduct, but on the quiet impact her case had upon everyone who witnessed it: victims, officers, spectators, and perhaps most importantly, Camilla herself. News travels quickly in our city, especially when the daughter of a corporate titan faces public accountability. The headlines were terse but pointed: "Judge holds CEO's daughter to the fire, privilege meets consequence in courtroom showdown, reckless driving case sparks conversation on equality under the law." Some articles praised the decision. Others questioned whether the consequences were too lenient or too harsh. But what struck me was the tone of public reaction. People felt seen. Something in the sentence resonated with those who often felt invisible in the shadow of wealth and influence. Marco returned to the courthouse a few days later, not for another hearing, but simply to drop off a thank you note. He handed it to the clerk, shy and soft-spoken. In it, he wrote, "For the first time, someone listened." I kept the note in my drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of why these cases matter, not because they challenge the powerful, but because they restore faith in fairness for those without power. As for Camilla, the transformation came quietly, without spectacle. Community service began the following week, and though I do not supervise such programs directly, I received the occasional report. The early notes were curt and unsurprising: resistant, dismissive, appears uninterested. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tone shifted. By the third week, the comments read, "More cooperative today," asked questions about safety procedures, showed concern for cyclist visibility after observing a near collision on Wickenden Street. One line in particular stayed with me: "Worked alongside volunteers without complaint. No phone used during the shift." These moments do not announce themselves with trumpets. Growth seldom does. It reveals itself in the quiet revisions of a person's thinking, the softening of edges, the widening of perspective, the recognition of one's place within a community rather than above it. The most unexpected turn came nearly a month after sentencing. A letter arrived on courthouse stationery, written in a handwriting that tried too hard to be neat. It was from Camilla. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not excuse her behavior. Instead, she wrote something I rarely see from defendants with backgrounds like hers. "I think I finally understand what you meant. People like me don't get told the truth often. Thank you for being one of the first." She ended with a simple line: "I'm still learning." It was not perfect, but it was honest, and honesty, especially from someone raised behind the insulating walls of privilege, is the first step toward change. Months later, I saw her again, though not in my courtroom. I was leaving a community event when she approached, hesitant and unadorned by the bravado she once wore like armor. "Judge," she said softly, "I wanted to say thank you, in person this time." She looked older, not in age, but in awareness, as though those weeks of service had added a layer of perspective no amount of wealth could provide. We spoke briefly, and as she walked away, I realized something important: justice is not always about punishment. Sometimes it is about interruption, interrupting a path that leads toward entitlement, arrogance, and harm, and redirecting it toward responsibility. That is the justice I believe in. The justice this city deserves. And so I leave you with this. Nobody stands above the law. Privilege without humility is a danger. Power without responsibility is corruption waiting to happen. I'm Judge Caprio. Remember, in my courtroom, it's not your name that matters, it's your actions.